What would you do if the person who ruined your life was the only one holding the truth about the family you lost? A quiet, misty morning in the misty highland village of Vietnam turns into a nightmare when Tu Tien, carrying a basket of fresh wild mountain pears, stumbles upon CEO Jack standing in the middle of a dusty mountain road. The man who once signed away her family's home. The man who vanished into the corporate upper class after leaving behind an unspoken debt is now standing just a few feet away from her. But he hasn't come to apologize, he has come to rebuild on the very ground her father died trying to protect. The highland mist hung heavy over the curved mountain passes, clinging to the dark, yin-yang tiled roofs of the ancient village homes. Down by the narrow roadside, Tu Tien knelt near her small wooden basket, carefully arranging a fresh batch of wild sour-sweet mountain pears. The fruit was tiny, speckled with rustic brown, and sold for a humble 20,000 dong a kilo. For the villagers, it was just a local wild snack, crisp, juicy, and sharp on the tongue. But for Tu Tien, every kilo sold meant another day keeping her family's remaining land safe from debt collectors. "Grandma, please take 2 kilos, Tu Tien said gently, her fingers rough and calloused as she adjusted the small balance scale. "They are fresh, picked right from the tall mountain trees at dawn. Sweet and crisp. Give me 2 kilos, child." The old woman smiled, dropping 40,000 dong into Tu Tien's small cloth purse. "You work too hard, Tu Tien. Every morning out in the damp mountain air. It's honest work, Grandma. The mountain gives us fruit, and as long as I have hands, I can work." She wiped her sweat with her sleeve, offering a humble smile to a passing tourist who stopped to buy a bag of pears. But just as she reached down to gather the remaining fruit, the sharp, heavy rumble of a high-end luxury vehicle cut through the tranquil morning air. The sudden screech of heavy tires against gravel sent a cloud of dust over her small roadside spot. Tu Tien looked up, her heart suddenly freezing in her chest. A tall man in a tailored jacket stepped out onto the muddy road. His polished shoes didn't belong in the dust of this forgotten valley. He looked around with cool, calculating eyes, assessing the ancient houses and the forested hillside as if measuring their value on a balance sheet. It was CEO Jack, the man whose abrupt land development deal 3 years ago had bankrupted her father's farm, sending her family into spiral debt and heartbreak. The man who had vanished without ever looking back, leaving Tu Tien to pick up the broken pieces of her life in this remote village. Tu Tien stood up slowly, her knuckles turning white around the handle of her bamboo basket. The open air suddenly felt thin, suffocating. Jack turned, his eyes sweeping across the roadside until they locked onto hers. For a fraction of a second, his calm demeanor flickered. His steps slowed, but he didn't run. He walked straight toward her. "Tu Tien," Jack said, his voice deep, controlled, and unnervingly quiet. "It's been a long time. What are you doing here, Jack?" Tu Tien's voice trembled, not from fear, but from the raw heat of suppressed anger. "This is a quiet village. There are no corporate deals for you to tear apart here." Jack looked at the basket of wild pears at her feet, then raised his gaze to meet her eyes. "I didn't come here to cause trouble. I am here for a construction project. A new eco-homestay development along the upper valley." A bitter laugh escaped Tu Tien's lips. "A development? On this land? You ruined my father. You took everything we had in the city, and now you follow us all the way to the mountains to take the last piece of quiet we have left." Jack did not break eye contact. He didn't offer a dramatic speech or defensive excuses. He simply reached into his coat pocket, pulled out an official blueprint roll, and laid it out on the flat surface of her wooden display table, right beside her remaining wild pears. "Look at the blueprints, Tu Tien," he said calmly. "I am not here to bulldoze this village. I came to keep a promise. A promise? Tu Tien scoffed, refusing to look at the papers. You don't make promises, Jack. You make contracts. Your father called me 3 days before he passed away? Jack said softly, his voice dropping so low that only she could hear it over the sound of the wind through the pines. The air around them went deathly still. Tu Tien froze, her throat tightening instantly. What did you say? She whispered, her hands trembling violently. He asked me to protect this valley, Jack replied, his gaze unwavering. He knew he was sick. He knew the bank was going to seize his old wooden estate up on the ridge. He transferred the debt structure to my firm, so the land wouldn't be auctioned off to strangers. I am here to rebuild his old timber house, not to tear it down, but to preserve it. You're lying, Tu Tien breathed, stepping back. You never cared about him. You were the one who signed the foreclosures. I signed the acquisition so the predatory lenders wouldn't take it, Jack said firmly. Look at the design, Tu Tien. The traditional yin-yang tile roof. The original timber structure beneath the foundation. Everything is being restored exactly as your father built it. Before Tu Tien could process the sudden shock, footsteps echoed from the path behind them. An old man, his hair entirely silver, shuffled out from the wooden porch of a nearby cottage, holding a small tool bag. It was Uncle Phuong, her father's lifelong friend and the local village carpenter. Jack, Uncle Phuong called out, stepping down onto the stone path. Are the new floorboard materials arriving today? The lower foundation needs reinforced bamboo beams before the afternoon rain comes. Jack turned to the old man with immediate respect, bowing his head slightly. Yes, Uncle Phuong, the shipment is already coming up the pass. We are keeping the original layout just as you requested. Tu Tien looked back and forth between Jack and Uncle Phuong, her mind spinning in total confusion. Uncle Phuong, you know about this. You're working with him? Uncle Phuong stopped, looking at Tu Tien with eyes filled with gentle sadness. He walked over and placed a warm, heavy hand on her shoulder. Child, Jack has been funding the restoration of your father's old house for 6 months. He asked us not to tell you until the title was clear and the land was safe from the creditors. Tu Tien felt as if the ground beneath her feet had suddenly vanished. All the bitter hatred she had carried for 3 years, all the sleepless nights spent selling fruit by the roadside to pay off endless interest, it was all based on a devastating misunderstanding. Why? Tu Tien turned to Jack, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Why would you let me hate you for 3 years? Why didn't you just tell me? Jack looked down at the blueprints on the table, adjusting the corners so the wind wouldn't catch them. Because if you knew, the creditors would have targeted you to get to the land title. You needed to be distant from the deal to be safe. You were young, Tu Tien. Your father wanted you to live without the crushing weight of his final sacrifice. Silence stretched between them, heavy and profound, broken only by the distant rustle of pine trees and the far-off sound of a stream flowing through the valley. Come up to the old house, Jack said quietly, breaking the silence. The wooden frame is finished. Uncle Phuong and I were about to prepare lunch before the second shift begins. You should see what your father left behind for you. Tu Tien hesitated, her heart pounding against her ribs, but the desire to see her childhood home one last time proved stronger than her confusion. She slowly packed her fruit scale, picked up her half-empty basket of wild pears, and followed the 2 men up the steep stone steps leading to the ridge. The old timber house stood proudly on the hillside, surrounded by tall greenery and wild blooms. The ancient yin-yang roof tiles glistened under the soft afternoon light. It was not a grand corporate resort. It was a humble, perfectly restored mountain haven that breathed with the exact warmth of her father's touch. Inside, the smell of freshly planed wood mixed with the comforting aroma of home-cooked food. On a simple bamboo table near the open porch sat a large platter of stir-fried rice vermicelli mixed with crisp mountain bamboo shoots, shredded carrots, black wood ear mushrooms, and slices of rich Vietnamese sausage. "Sit down, Tu Tien," Uncle Phuong said warmly, placing a bowl and a pair of wooden chopsticks before her. "Jack built the outdoor kitchen shelf this morning just so we could cook a proper hot meal here." Tu Tien sat down slowly on the low wooden bench. She watched Jack as he casually wiped down the wooden table, his expensive dress shirt sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing arms coated in fine sawdust. There was no arrogance in his movements, no corporate coldness, only the steady, humble dedication of a man working with his hands. "The bamboo shoots are fresh," Jack said, placing a bowl of hot tea beside her. "Uncle Phuong picked them from the lower grove this morning." "You used to love stir-fried vermicelli with bamboo shoots when you were little, didn't you?" Tu Tien looked down at the steaming bowl. Tears finally escaped her eyes, dripping silently into her lap. "You remembered? Your father talked about you every single day," Jack replied quietly, taking a seat across from her. "He didn't care about the money or the land. He only cared that you would always have a place to come back to when life became too difficult." Tu Tien picked up her chopsticks, her hands still trembling slightly. She took a small bite of the noodles. The rustic, rich flavor hit her instantly, crisp, earthy, savory, and warm. It tasted exactly like the meals her family used to share on rain-soaked mountain evenings. "It's good," she whispered, her voice choking up. "It tastes just like home." "Then eat," Jack said gently, a rare, soft smile finally gracing his face. "You don't have to carry the heavy burdens alone anymore, Tu Tien. The debt is clear. The home is yours." Outside, the mountain fog began to lift, revealing the bright green valley stretching far below. The road ahead was still long, and the years of pain could not be erased in a single afternoon. But as they sat together under the ancient wooden roof, sharing a simple meal while the cold mountain wind blew past, Tu Tien knew that the dark shadow over her life had finally parted. She reached into her basket, picked out 2 of her finest, sweetest mountain pears, and placed them gently on Jack's plate. "For dessert," she said softly, meeting his gaze with a peaceful, quiet smile. "They're very sweet today." Jack looked at the small rustic fruit, then up at her face, nodding quietly in understanding. In the heart of the mist-covered mountains, where old wounds were finally laid to rest, a new beginning had quietly begun.